This is a Geek Leader. Hey, Geek Leaders. Welcome to episode 134 of the podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by Private Internet Access. And if you haven't used Private Internet Access, then you're probably not surfing the web securely. I use Private Internet Access whenever I'm connecting from my home to do anything, whenever I travel especially. I remember a couple years ago I went to a conference, and as soon as I connected to the hotel Wi-Fi, my endpoint protection was like pinging me that I was not secure, that I was getting attacked by different folks. So I immediately opened up Private Internet Access, connected to my VPN, and all that went away. Private Internet Access is an encryption service. It encrypts all your traffic going in and out. You can also choose different geolocations. So if I'm testing something, I make a change, and my DNS servers are caching in my area, I can hop on over and log in California and then test it and say, oh, okay, DNS here, doesn't have the cache that I had before, so I can see the changes that I've made accurately, and it makes things so much easier and so much better. And you can try Private Internet Access for just $3 a month. Seriously, $3.33 a month is what it's starting at. And just visit geekleader.com/VPN. Again, that's geekleader.com/VPN. All right, Geek Leaders, today on the show, we've got Dr. Gleb Tsipursky, and he wrote a book called Never Go With Your Gut. And I just finished going through this book. It's got a lot of great stuff. And a little bit about Dr. Tsipursky is you're a disaster avoidance expert. Can you tell me a little bit about what that is and how you got that title?
Sure, happy to do so. So most people, when they think about disasters, they think about managing disasters. They think about leaping into the middle of a crisis. You've just been cyber hacked. How do I address that? That's kind of the glorious job, the glorious position, addressing that. However, if you think about it in advance, there's a really nice quote by Ben Franklin, which says an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. So I provide the ounce of prevention because really the best thing you can do is prevent disasters as opposed to manage them. So that's my area, that's my expertise. And how I got that title is that my background is in decision making. And of course, the wise decisions are the ones that prevent disasters. So that's what I help folks do, make the wisest possible decisions to prevent disasters in their business, in their career, and so on. And I've been studying this topic for over 20 years, and I've been doing consulting, coaching, speaking, training. I've been in higher education doing cognitive neuroscience on this topic, and I can go more into that. But basically, my clients have started calling me, oh, you've saved me from this disaster, you've saved me from that disaster, and somebody called me a disaster avoidance expert. So I thought, hey, that's a pretty cool title. Let me start doing that. So yeah, that's how I came up with the title and started using that.
So that gives us a little bit about your background. What made you want to write a book called Never Go With Your Gut?
Well, the common advice that we get in business leadership is to go with your gut. And I've always been incredibly frustrated with that advice, and it's made me pretty angry because I've seen many people fall into terrible disasters when they go with their gut. Now, I'll go a little bit more into my background. When I was a kid, the reason I went into this topic partially was because my dad always told me to go with my gut. And I made some bad decisions as a result of that. And I also saw him make some really bad decisions. So he was a real estate agent, and so he was able to make money and in a way that wasn't obvious or controlled, right? You get a commission on a house. And so he had some money from my mom, kind of serious amounts of money. He ended up buying a small apartment on the side. And once my mom found out a couple of years later, there was a terrible blowout fight, and they separated for a while. She could never really trust him again after that. So that was a really bad disaster in my family. And that made me really think about why people make bad decisions that lead to disasters by going with their guts. Then as I was growing up, I saw the dot-com boom and bust. So I was born in 81, and in 1999, I was 18. So I remember 1999, party like it's 1999, and people were pouring money into the dot-coms like it was a big party. They spent billions and billions of dollars. And then as I was coming of age a little bit further, when I was 21 in 2002, that's the bust time, when all of those dot-coms busted, lost almost all of them. I think the only one standing is Amazon. And they lost so much money for so many millions of people and billions of dollars. Again, people made terrible decisions by going with their guts, by going with their intuitions. And so I studied this topic. I was doing consulting, coaching on one side, training, speaking, and I went into higher academia, got my PhD in studying how people make their decisions and how they can make better decisions. And I learned that we tend to go with our gut intuitions in making decisions. And that's really a bad idea and a bad strategy for making decisions. And that's why I ended up studying this topic and writing the book.
Yeah. So I've always been one also to say, hey, we should go with your gut. And when I read this, I started thinking about it. It's like, well, in some situations, yes, but not in as many as I thought originally. What are some situations where maybe it is okay to go with your gut?
So the situations that are okay to go with your gut have to do with specifically the background of why we tend to go with our gut and when it's a bad idea and when it's a good idea. And the bigger framework here that we need to understand is that our gut is evolved not for the modern contemporary business environment or civic environment. We tend to make a lot of bad civic decisions in our politics when we go with our gut, and our communities. Our gut is evolved for the savanna environment. When we went around in small little tribes of a couple of dozen people up to 150 people, that's kind of what, and we had to fight the saber-toothed tigers. That's what our gut is evolved for. So the two primal determinants of our gut are tribalism, where we have a very strong tribal sensibility and we like people who look like us and who talk like us and who we had a strong connection with, and we don't like others who are not. So that's one dynamic. The other dynamic is the saber-toothed tiger response. You've probably heard of that. You might have also heard of the fight or flight response.
Yes.
So those are the two moments when it's a wise idea to go with your gut is an immediate in the moment physical danger, physical threat. You don't want to stand there and think about with your head rationally about whether you should get out of the way of a moving bus. That's a time to go with your gut and just get out of the way of the moving bus. Not a worry. And the other time is when you are observing people with whom you've interacted for a long time. So again, that looks like the tribal savanna environment. It's someone with who is your fellow tribal member. And if you've been engaging with that person for a long time, then you know her or his behaviors and tendencies. And if they change, then you should suspect something is off or problematic. You learned how to read this person. But in the large majority of other cases, when you're not dealing with someone who you know for a while, when you're not dealing with someone who you feel like part of a tribe, you should not go with your gut. When you're dealing with new decisions, you should not go with your gut. So the other thing that we often tend to make the mistake of how we think about our gut intuitions is learned behaviors. So unfortunately, we tend to confuse healthy learned behaviors with behaviors that just have to go with our instincts. So for example, as a tech leader, you might have learned very well that certain types of problems with your systems have to do with a certain type of malfunction. There's a certain reason why that malfunction happens. And so you can immediately, when you see the problem, say, okay, it's probably because of that, right? You've learned how to do that. It's not an intuitive behavior. It took you a long time to do. Right now, it feels very comfortable. It feels like you're going with your intuition. Oh yes, that's the problem, immediate solution. And you'll be right 99.9% of the time. But you have to learn that. It wasn't an intuitive thing, but it only now feels like an intuitive thing. It's just like riding a car. Mm-hmm. Right now, I'm riding a car, I turn the wheel, I check behind my shoulder to merge into a different lane. That's great. But I had to learn how to do that behavior. So we can't mistake these healthy learned behaviors for our gut intuitions.
Yeah, I definitely get that because we recently got a new car. We got a Tesla, and the the regenerative braking was one of those things that I had to figure out. I kind of I had this, what I thought was, I even said it, I think when I was driving, I said, my instinct is to hit the brake, take my foot off the gas and hit the brake. But when I take my foot off the gas, the car brakes, it automatically starts to slow down. So I had to get used to that adjustment and that change. And it felt like it was an instinct, but it was a learned behavior.
Exactly.
In your book, you mentioned you're going through some of the, business disasters that came as a result of a gut decision. And one of the ones you mentioned is Equifax. And we've talked on the show about Equifax, from a cybersecurity standpoint in the past. How was the Equifax disaster, as we'll call it, from a gut decision?
So many technology leaders are very technical and very analytical, and they think that they really approach things in an analytical manner. However, what research on this topic has discovered is that about 80 to 90% of human decision making, regardless of whether you're in technology or whether you're in something much more soft and woo like sales, they all come from emotions, from our intuitions. So think about Equifax. These are very technical people. They are analyzing people's credit, right? Very technical. But what happened after the Equifax breach was discovered? They discovered it. It came from a serious technological issue where they didn't patch flaws that they knew were there. The government told them that, hey, your security has a number of flaws, and they chose not to patch them up. So that's a really bad decision when you don't patch up these security flaws. They were complacent. And there's a specific cognitive bias. Now, my expertise is in cognitive biases. Cognitive biases are the systemic patterns of poor decisions that we make when we tend to go with our gut. And there's a cognitive bias called the normalcy bias. So the normalcy bias has to do with us having a lot of trouble imagining a really catastrophic situation because it hasn't happened before. We just think that things will go as they went in the past. Things will be normal. So the Equifax folks couldn't imagine the size of the security breach that actually happened. So that was the first big problem, that they didn't patch up the security in the first place. The second big problem that really got them in big trouble is once they discovered the security flaw, they chose to try to cover it up. They chose to not reveal the information right away. It took them several months to reveal the information. And they were way too optimistic, and that's called the optimism bias. They were way too optimistic about their ability to address the flaw and about public reaction to the revelation in a couple of months instead of immediately. So that was another big problem for the Equifax company, coming from the optimism bias. So the optimism bias and the normalcy bias led them into something that caused them a huge amount of problems, led pretty much the whole leadership team to resign, and lost the company a whole bunch of money because of them going with their gut.
Yeah, and when I was also thinking about it, I thought a little bit about you early in the book. You talked about loss aversion. You kind of had this little game where you play about flipping a coin and making a bet versus getting a speeding ticket and all that stuff. How is loss aversion playing into the Equifax situation? Because for me, I kind of thought about it like, well, Equifax has kind of built this reputation of you can trust us with your social security number and with all this stuff. And if we come out and we tell you guys we were breached, how is that going? What are we going to lose for that? What is we don't want to lose anything, so maybe we can just not tell you, and we'll gamble on the fact that you'll never find out.
Yep. Yes, exactly. So that was a component of their optimism. So the loss aversion has to do with the idea that we don't want to lose, we don't want to feel like losers, and we don't want to lose resources. Mm-hmm. And that causes us to make really bad short-term decisions at the cost of very high long-term losses. The short-term loss from Equifax, if they had announced that they had a security breach a couple of months before they actually did announce it, they would have had many less losses. But it would have been pretty painful. They would have had to take the write-off right away. And they didn't want to do that. And they gambled on the fact that nobody would find out, as you rightly pointed out, which is kind of a ludicrous gamble. It's pretty idiotic. People would find out. This is a huge company. There's over 100 million. What was the last count of 140 million names? And the email kind of content from I know that my information was one of the ones that was leaked, unfortunately, and so many other Americans.
Yeah, mine too.
People would, yeah, there you go. So got that shared. So we know that it would have been eventually revealed, and they just didn't want to take the hit when they should have taken the hit. So this loss aversion, desire to not lose anything, caused them to have many more losses going forward.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that's for sure true, and it's one of those things where it's going to be bad, you can just get it over with, or you can kind of make it worse in the long run. I think they kind of made it worse, I guess.
Absolutely.
One of the chapters in your book, I can't remember which one it is right now, you talk about the dangers of judgment errors. You kind of went through like what color your glasses, and it kind of reminded me of something we talked about on the show before with everybody has a different perspective, and they see things from different perspectives. And sometimes your perspectives can skew reality in a certain way. What are some of the disasters that you've seen either happen or get avoided because of different perspectives that people have?
Well, different perspectives that people have really make them sometimes judge things differently in a way that's highly problematic for their outcomes. I'll give you an example for actually technology folks, so technology audits.
Okay.
Now, in technology audits, when I talk to technology leaders, they often tell me, frankly, behind closed doors, that the real problems that they find in technology audit problems, when they find serious issues, the problems lie with people. The people who actually do the technology. Maybe they're not actually using their email securely and leaving a lot of potential for cyber hacking. Maybe there are whole lots of issues. That's just one. There are so many others. But what the tech auditors, when they judge how to approach these issues, they usually, almost never, highlight people problems. They instead focus on technical challenges and process issues. Why is that? Well, they don't want to cause tensions. They don't want to cause conflicts. They're conflict averse. And that's one. And the second is, often they don't know how to deal with people issues. They don't know how to effectively approach people problems, and they know how to deal with process issues and technical challenges. So they focus on that. It's like kind of the old joke about the police officer approaching a drunk who's like looking around under a spotlight, and the police officer's asking the drunk, hey, what are you looking for here? And the drunk is like, oh, I'm looking for my keys. And the police officer is like, well, where did you drop your keys? And the drunk is like, I don't know, somewhere away. I'm not sure. And the police officer is like, well, why are you looking under the spotlight? Well, because this is the area I can see. Yeah. It's like when everything you have when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And even when they know that the people are the problem, they don't look at the people. And so this is a kind of a typical judgment error that we make when we have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That's one. And again, the tribal issue, that we don't want to make conflicts within our tribe. In the long run, it would be so much better to address the people issue, because the people issues are the real challenges. And so that's something I often work with technology leaders on: how do you effectively address the people issues in such a way that will result in the best long-term outcomes for the company, even at the cost of short-term conflicts. And a lot of folks are too conflict avoidant, and they need to get over it. Mm-hmm. So that's an interesting story.
Yeah, for sure. So let's say you have some of these issues. Maybe you make your past has this tribal kind of judgment where sometimes you make mistakes. How can we get better at taking a step back sometimes and not making these reactionary gut decisions?
So some of the things I talk about is there are two separate techniques that are really helpful. If you're looking at the moment, there's a there's a longer technique for more serious judgment decision making, and we can talk about that. But for in the moment, since you asked about in the moment, there's a quick 5 questions that you can ask about any situation. It will take you less than 5 minutes to ask these 5 questions, and it will save you so much trouble, so much stress, so much hassle, and so much money down the road that it would be foolish not to ask these questions. So here are the 5 questions. What important information did I not yet fully consider about this decision? So again, you want to look for information that is important, so you don't get stuck in analysis paralysis and looking at all the information. So only important information, and then information that you didn't consider. That's usually going to be information that goes against your preferred option. So if you want to get one database software, have you sufficiently considered other database softwares? Why are you thinking about this one? I've often seen technology leaders get a database software that a seller has come and pushed in their way, not sufficiently considering all the other software. I mean, the seller is very good at, the salesperson is very good at building a personal relationship, building a personal connection in such a way that other factors, important factors about the software aren't considered. That's another example. Mm-hmm. So what important information did I not yet fully consider? What dangerous judgment errors did I not yet address? And we went over a number already in this conversation: loss aversion, normalcy bias, and so on. So the book, Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters, goes over the 30 most dangerous judgment errors for business leaders, technology leaders, of course, and how you can address them. So that's the second question. What would a trusted and objective advisor suggest I do? So imagine, little John Ruda on your shoulder. What would he suggest you do in this situation? What would someone who's a trusted and objective advisor suggest you do? So think about that. Mm-hmm. Then, so these are the first 3 questions are about making the decision. The second, the fourth and fifth question are about implementing the decision. Fourth, how have I addressed all the ways that this decision can fail? So think about all the ways that the decision can fail, whether it's a software implementation, whether it's a new person you're hiring, maybe it's a new cybersecurity implementation that perhaps the people in your team, in your organization would not be so likely to follow because it's a lot of hassles. How have you addressed all the ways that this can fail? And finally, what new information would cause me to revisit this decision? This is a critical question to ask while you're making the decision. Why is that? We tend to get too caught up in the decision implementation and not notice when the decision is going wrong. We're already committed to it. We're not taking a step back and thinking about, well, maybe I should change my mind. If you get this information at the beginning, what new information during the decision, what new information would cause me to revisit this decision, you'll be much, much more likely to more effectively implement the decision going forward. So those 5 quick questions can save you so much stress, time, hassle, and money going down the road. Like I said, it would be a bad idea if you don't ask these questions.
Yeah, those are great. And that reminded me of something you said in your book. There's a common saying that a lot of people say is planning to fail, or failing to plan is planning to fail. And you kind of said, no, that's not exactly correct. And you said it a different way. How is it that you see that quote?
Sure. So this is a common myth, a pretty misleading myth, that failing to plan is planning to fail. In reality, there is one of the cognitive biases is called the planning fallacy. And the planning fallacy relates to the fact that when we make plans, we tend to make the best plans for the best outcomes, And we know that plans will never survive contact with the enemy, but our intuitions, our gut reactions, still cause us to make the plans as though they will survive contact with the enemy. And we direct resources of time, money, energy, specifically to be appropriate with the best possible plan. So a much more effective saying and a much more effective approach to work and life is failing to plan for problems is planning to fail. Again, failing to plan for problems is planning to fail. You want to think about, this is the same thing as number 4, how have I addressed all the ways this can fail? Think about all the potential problems that might arise. Whether we mentioned several situations. If you're implementing a new cybersecurity initiative, perhaps the staff in your organization would find the hassle and they would not want to go along with it. So what kind of effective change management strategies can you implement to actually get people to buy into this new cybersecurity initiative? Or maybe you're doing a database implementation. I mean, if you look at the statistics on major IT projects like database implementations, you'll see that about 86% of these database implementations and other major IT projects go over budget and time. So that means that people didn't have a good plan for these sorts of initiatives. And you don't want to be stuck in that same boat. They didn't think about all the problems, so they didn't direct their money and time resources effectively. So you want to think about what are all the problems that might come up, add up all the problems and the likelihood of them happening, and then commit sufficient resources of time and money, or leave time and money available to address potential problems in your plan going forward. And that's how, and of course, if you can imagine some problems that can be avoided, like getting buy-in into your new cybersecurity initiative, you should absolutely do that and integrate this into your plan. So that's the much more effective saying. Failing to plan for problems is planning to fail.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned kind of planning to have a little bit extra just in case there's a problem. And I think one of the examples is, in your book, that if you have 15 minutes to get to a meeting, don't leave to get there exactly in 15 minutes. Plan on the fact there may be traffic. Plan on that you might forget something. Plan on, it could be raining, or somebody else could be in your parking spot and you have to park further away. Plan on something like that, right? Mm-hmm. What do you think is a good amount of padding, I would say, you should put in your plans for, let's say you have a 3-month project. What do you think a good buffer would be to put in there so that you can plan for certain things that you haven't thought of yet?
The research suggests that about 40% is the best buffer. So you want to customize it to yourself. If you tend to be overly optimistic, as many technology leaders tend to be, you might want to do it more than 40%. But a general good buffer is 40%. So 40% more money, 40% more time, and 40% more other resources than you planned, than you imagined you would need.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I'm thinking back about projects and things that I've worked on. About 40% is probably about right. Yeah.
There you go. And of course, the problem when you don't invest that time, you have to decide, well, do I stop doing the project? Most of the time, you wouldn't stop doing the project because you already put in a lot of resources, but then you don't have enough money and time for other projects that are really important, and that's going to really bite you in the butt down the road.
Yeah. How does that play into like the sunk cost fallacy?
Oh, the sunk cost fallacy is a big one. It's when we have invested money and time into a project, we started a project up, and then a situation comes up where we realize the project is no longer worthwhile, for example, or it's going to be way more expensive and time intensive than we imagined it to be. But because we already committed the initial money and time to it, we don't want to stop. And again, that's our gut intuitions. Why? Why do we not want to stop, even when it makes total logical, rational, reasonable sense to do so? Because we feel invested. We feel we sunk the money and time, and if we don't stop, then we're wrong. That means that we made the bad decision in the first place to invest the money. And so it has to do with our ego, with our gut intuitions. It has to do with our emotions. And again, all of this stuff, primarily at the base of it, has to do with our emotions. We don't want to be wrong. We don't want to feel like we're wrong. And therefore, we don't stop the project, even though it becomes a brilliant idea to do so, that would save you much more money and time down the road. I mean, think about the Boston dig. I lived in Boston when the Boston dig was in the early stages of the Boston dig. Now, when they originally planned the Boston dig, it was supposed to be something like $3 billion. It ended up being something like $21 billion.
Oh my God.
I mean, imagine that huge amount of money. Nobody would have gone for it if it was going to be $21 billion instead of $3 billion. And it was obvious at the beginning that it was going to be an astronomically larger amount of money than they originally planned for. And still, they went ahead because, if they admitted that they made a mistake in the first place, then they'd be wrong. And of course, nobody wants to be wrong. Nobody wants to admit that they're wrong. And unfortunately, this human tendency, very human, very has to do with our emotions, led to an incredible waste of time and money that could have, I mean, think about the horrible state of our infrastructure around the country. This additional, how much did they spend? 21 minus 3, so $18 billion could have been spent so much better elsewhere in the country to fix our bridges and fix roads instead of creating a new infrastructural thing in Boston that just made cars go a little bit faster throughout the center of the city, which was what the Boston Dig was about. But no, they spent it all on this, the new highway tunnels in the city itself, so cars can get out in and out 15 minutes faster. Jeez, yeah, pretty frustrating.
Yeah, for sure. And you're right. It's one of those things where, like, once you've spent that, you can't really go back, or you don't feel like you can go back because you already invested something. But what I found recently is that it's usually a lot better to cut your losses and say, hey, this is a learning experience. We learned something from this, and now we're not going to make this mistake when we move forward. Let's end this project and go to something that's actually worth the investment.
That's very wise, and that's kind of the attitude that you need to take. So the strategy to addressing sunken costs is to stop, look at the project and say, ignore the previous resources that we invested, just kind of ignore them. Imagine that's the cost that sunk. Do you want to throw good money after the bad or not? Look at where you are right now. From where you are, let's say you're 15% into the project, and you've now found that it's going to take 50% more resources. So you're 15% into the project. Are you willing to invest 50% more resources to accomplish this project, or is it the additional 50% of resources makes this project not worthwhile? And then you've gained so much if you cut your losses right now and just ignore it, go on forward. See it as a learning experience and see it as something you're proud of. Kind of learning experience is a rational, analytical approach to it. But the sense of pride is a way to address your emotions. And these emotions, again, they're at the heart of what causes us to make bad decisions. So if you can learn to be proud of cutting your losses and associate positive emotions with successfully cutting your losses, then you're really addressing the sunken cost fallacy.
I like that idea of being proud. It kind of shows that it takes maturity to step back, think about it, and move forward. It's almost like a better leader would make those type of decisions versus one that just says, hey, I don't want to be wrong, so I'm going to keep going.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. And that's a better type of leader, and that's where the sense of pride comes in. Yep.
So what other pieces of advice would you have for a new leader out there that needs to make the right decisions and not rush into decisions and not fall into these traps that we have from our ancestors?
I think the most important piece of advice that I give folks that they find most helpful is to not mistake the feeling of comfort for something that is true. So what is this? So the feeling of comfort is our gut intuitions. We feel comfortable with something. We feel comfortable with investing more resources into a previous project because it feels right. It feels like something we should do. We feel comfortable with not revealing the information about a cyber attack, a cyber hacking, because we feel comfortable. We feel it's the right thing to do to not reveal this information and to instead try to cover it up and go forward as if nothing happened. We feel right about treating people who are not like us in a way as though they're wrong, different, or problematic. We feel proud, we feel good, we feel comfortable with making plans that are the best laid plans. Hey, everything will go well, we'll make this plan, we'll invest, these resources, and we'll get our outcome. We feel comfortable with it. We feel right. That's the way that our gut feels. And unfortunately, the vast majority of leaders tend to go with what they're comfortable with. And the ability to tolerate discomfort and step back is one of the most underappreciated but hugely important qualities of leadership. Being able to step back and say, hey, I might feel comfortable with this, but the comfort that I feel doesn't indicate anything about whether this is the right thing to do or not. And this is a very, very difficult thing to learn to do, but it's the most critical skill that you can develop as a leader for making good decisions. Differentiate what feels comfortable to you from what is actually right and true. And say, okay, it feels comfortable to me, but I know that my gut often causes me to make bad decisions. So let me check with my head before going with my gut. Let me check and analyze a situation carefully and thoroughly, and be especially on the lookout for information that goes against my preferred decision, my preferred option. Let me look for all the ways that this situation can fail, and what ways what information would cause me to revisit this decision? What would a trusted and objective advisor suggest I do? And what dangerous judgment errors haven't I yet addressed? Taking 5 minutes to answer these questions and to step back would get you so much more going forward. If you remember that making the choice that feels uncomfortable, counterintuitive, is often the very best thing that you can do as a leader in the long run.
Yeah, I think it's the best thing you can do as a person too. It's one of the things I like to say. I say a lot of times we need to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Because anything that we do that's really comfortable is probably the wrong thing to be doing.
Yes, exactly.
Sitting on the couch and watching TV is very comfortable, but I probably should be up running. Getting on the Peloton and starting to run is one of those things that it's not very comfortable, but it's what I should be doing right now. So,
absolutely, It's like taking that third donut. It feels very comfortable to us, but it's often the wrong thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. How can people find out more about the work that you're doing, connect with you, and maybe find out where to get your book?
Sure. So they can check out the book in bookstores everywhere. It's, whether Amazon, Barnes & Noble, physical bookstores, independent bookstores, props to them. Check them out. Again, it's Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters. Folks can find me and my work with consulting, coaching, and training on blog and so on, videos on disasteravoidanceexperts.com, disasteravoidanceexperts.com. And I welcome any of you to connect with me on LinkedIn. Dr. Gleb Tsipursky there, so Gleb, Tsipursky, and I look forward to connecting with you and seeing how we can learn about each other and help each other. So that's what I want to share with you.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and link all those up in the show notes. You guys can find all that at ageekleader.com. There'll be links to the LinkedIn and to a disaster avoidance website, as well as this book, which is Never Go With Your Gut. And I've read it, and I listened to the audio version. I highly recommend picking up I like the physical copy personally because of the exercises that are in the back and some of the images that are in here. So check that out. Even if you get the audio book, get a physical copy too. It's going to be helpful for you. But I appreciate you coming on the show. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me on, John. It's a pleasure.
Hope you guys enjoyed that episode with Dr. Gleb Tsipursky, and check out his book. It was an awesome read, and it was interesting to talk about disaster avoidance. A lot of times we talk about disaster recovery, but to talk about disaster avoidance was great. And you can find out his book and all the other books for the guests that have been on here at ageekleader.com, and just click on the link, books from our guests. And also, don't forget, check out Virtual Private Internet Access, Private Internet Access, which is the VPN that I use at ageekleader.com/VPN.